thanks so much for that. Now, the World Bank has cut India's growth forecast for FY26 and FY27, projecting growth acceleration is imminent from FY28. However, the report has highlighted that India is estimated to maintain the fastest growth rate among the world's largest economies. The World Bank also expects global growth to slow to 2008 levels of 2.3%, excluding recessions, citing rising trade barriers and policy uncertainty as the main reasons. Ritu Singh now joins us with more details. Ritu, take us through the highlights of this report.
Let me begin with India, which is projected to maintain the fastest growth rate among the world's largest economies at 6.3% for FY26. But this is a slight downgrade, about 40 basis points lower than World Bank's January forecast, mainly because of weaker global demand and rising trade barriers impacting our exports. Now, this number compares with IMF's forecast of 6.2% and RBI's own 6.5% projection for the fiscal. But India is expected to bounce back. Growth is projected to average 6.6% in the next two fiscal years at 6.5% for FY27 and 6.7% for FY28, driven by a strong services sector and a recovery in exports. But the picture is far less optimistic for the global economy, where growth is expected to weaken to 2.3% this year, with deceleration in most economies relative to last year. This, the World Bank says, will mark the slowest rate of growth since 2008, aside, of course, from outright global recessions. Now, a slow and uneven recovery is expected, with growth inching up to 2.4% in 2026 and 2.6% thereafter, leaving the global output materially below the January projections. To compare, IMF's last forecast for global economy was a tad higher at 2.8% this year and 3% for 2026. Now, the World Bank says rising trade barriers, policy uncertainty, and geopolitical tensions are largely to blame. Growth in advanced economies as well as emerging market economies will still remain far below their pre-pandemic trend, and the per capita income growth in emerging economies is expected to lag behind the richer nations, and poverty reduction, especially in fragile and conflict-hit countries, is stalling. Now, global trade is also expected to slow down sharply to well below historic averages this year. The World Bank says risks are mostly to the downside. A major worry, of course, is if the US raises the average tariffs by 10 percentage points, for instance, and trading partners retaliate, global growth could plunge by another 0.5% this year. But if disputes are resolved and tensions ease, growth could also increase by 0.2 percentage points, which offers some upside potential.
Right, Ritu, thanks so much.